So as you know, I've been camping out in Genesis talking about Joseph. He's a fascinating character, at least in my reading and my study. Certainly has some qualities that I would love to be able to emulate in terms of his faithfulness, his patience, his endurance, given some of the things that he was exposed to as an individual. So many of those things were wrongful. I mean, he was kidnapped, he was put in jail, he was accused of rape, all sorts of things, and yet he never lost his trust and faith in God. And it just reminds me that sometimes it's good to have a big brother, and that is the name of the lesson this morning. It's called Big Brother. It's taken from Genesis chapter 45, verses 1 through 5, as we continue our study about Joseph. Joseph could no longer control himself in front of all of his attendants. So he declared, "Everyone, leave now." So no one stayed with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians and Pharaoh's household heard him. Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm Joseph. Is my father really still alive?" His brothers couldn't respond because they were terrified before him. Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they moved closer. He said, "I'm your brother Joseph. You know, the one that you sold to Egypt. But now don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves that you sold me here. Actually, God sent me before you to save lives." It's interesting to me that you can speak the truth, but do so lovingly. I mean, Joseph didn't pull any punches. He flat out said, "Don't be upset with yourselves, and don't be angry with yourselves because you sold me into slavery." So he's not letting them off the hook for what they did, but he can still be compassionate and loving. And this is a picture of a basketball player, as you can see. And there's just a few seconds left, and the game teeters on two particular free throws. The shooter gulps and the gym goes silent, except for the tapping of a white cane on the back of the basketball rim. Yeah, that's right. The shooter's brother is under the hoop, wrapping a cane on the rim because the shooter, his name is Matt Stephen, he's blind. Matt is a senior. He'd been on St. Lawrence Catholic Youth Organization team for a year and had never played in a single game. And frankly, he never expected to. He just likes being on the team, said Matt's brother and coach, Joe. Matt shoots free throws every practice and makes about half of them. And that's what gave Joe, the coach, and Matt's brother this really crazy idea. Because it was a charity tournament in February of 2009, and Joe asked the other teams if Matt could shoot all of St. Lawrence's free throws. And amazingly, since it's a charity tournament, all the teams agreed, and so did the refs. So the first game, to the crowd's shock, Matt made his first two attempts. And he was escorted back to the bench where he grinned as if he had just kissed the head cheerleader. I mean, he was from ear to ear grinning. And actually, on that particular day, in those games, Matt was 4 for 8, so shooting 50%. Now, Matt doesn't talk much because he has a stutter. So when Joe got home late after the game, their mom, Joan, said, "Why's Matt been smiling all night?" Kind of yawns. "He just shot all of our free throws tonight. He's going to tomorrow night, too." And Joan just about dropped her spaghetti because, I mean, she likes it when Matt does things. I mean, like if he could ride a bike or he could ice skate or play soccer. I mean, she sort of likes that stuff, but she's dreading the day when Matthew would come home and he's hurting because she's protecting her son. But Matt already knows what it's like to be hurting. Hurting is being born with 2 permanently detached retina. Hurting is having your left eye removed in the 5th grade and having your right eye removed in the 6th. Hurting is when they send you to a high school for blind students, even though the last thing you want to do And the last place you want to be is around other blind kids. Matt just aches to be normal. Not, oh, he's great for a blind kid, normal. No, Matt just wants normal. And that's why the free throws meant so much to Matt that day. He'd begged his parents to let him transfer to just a regular school. And so he ended up transferring to Monsignor Bonner High School. And he'd begged his brother to let him join his friends on the CYO team. And then, for the first time in his life, he was going to be one of them. He was going to be on the basketball team, which brings us to Matt's moment in that now second game. Unfortunately, Matt had missed his first 6 free throws that day. And St. Lawrence, the team for which he was playing, was down to St. Philomene. Then a full court press pulled Matt's team to within 1 point with 10 seconds left to play. And that's when St. Lawrence's best shooter is fouled in the shooting lane, which results in 2 free throws. Now, surely, with the game on the line and the team's stud, you would think that he'd be shooting the free throws, right? And up in the stands, Matt's mom is just hoping that this other guy will shoot the free throws. And the star kind of thought the same thing too. It's like, I was fouled. I'm the best shooter on the team. We're down by 1. We have 10 seconds left. I should probably be taking the free throws. Until he looked over at Matt on the bench. And he thought, you know what? It's everyone's dream to make these shots in that kind of a game, with that on the line, with those few seconds. So, out comes Matt. And for the first time, the St. Phil fans aren't rooting for him. They were hoping that Matt would shoot his ball straight at the hot dog stand. But for once, Matt was just, well, Matt. He was normal. And now the ball is bouncing under Matt's hand. Now the rim pings come from the cane. And Matt lets it go. Off the backboard, through the net. Tie game. Crowd goes crazy. The crowd now is hushed. Dribble, dribble, dribble. Tap, 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 tap. Shoot, bank, swish. He makes the second free throw. So now his team is up by 1 point with 10 seconds left in the game. The gym windows nearly break, and St. Phil's players forget to give Matt an opportunity to get off the hardwood. So 9 guys are running around Matthew, who's just trying to find a way, because he's blind, off the basketball court. And make that 10, because since the team stud was off watching Matt take the free throws, he gets back onto the court. Oh, then make that 11, because now Joe, the coach, is trying to get out onto the court while all the players are rushing to the other side of the court, trying to get Matt off the court and do so safely. So chaos is now mixed with joy, and St. Phil's desperate shot misses. Game over. And since then, Matt's life has just gone all kinds of crazy. His teammates call him Shooter. A girl says she's heard all about him. He's even thinking about asking someone to the prom. And I hope that she said yes, because it will probably be the best blind date of her life. Right? No. I told that whole story, Steve, to let you know that big brothers can make a difference in life, can't they? I mean, do any of you have bullies on your block? Can Big Brother protect you? I mean, if you forget your lunch money, a Big Brother always has a little extra cash, right? You can't keep your balance on your bike. I mean, he'll steady you. That's what Big Brothers do. They're bigger than you. They're stronger than you. They're wiser. And since he's family, you're his priority. For your Big Brother, he has one job, and that's to get you through stuff. Through the neighborhood, through the math quiz, through the shopping mall. I mean, big brothers walk us through the rough patches in life. And I don't know, I'm an only child, so I never had a big brother. And maybe some of you are similar. Maybe you have all sisters. I don't know. But could you use a big brother? I mean, maybe you're not trying to make a basket, but maybe you're trying to make a living, or you're trying to make sense out of a pandemic that's been caused by some foreign microbe that you can't even see. I mean, could you maybe use a big brother? The sons of Jacob certainly did, because as they stood before Joseph, they were the picture, I'm imagining, of pity. They've been accused of stealing a silver cup, tongue-tied goat herders before a superpower sovereign. Remember, he is number 2 in command, just a step below the Pharaoh. His brothers had nothing to offer but prayers, nothing. Nothing to request but his help. So Judah told the prince their story, how their father was frail and old, how one son had died, and how losing Benjamin, the youngest now in the family, would surely kill their father. So Judah even offered to stay in Benjamin's place if that's what it would take to save his family. They were face first, I'm imagining, on the floor, hoping desperately for mercy. And you know what? They received a whole lot more. 22 years of tears and trickery had finally, mercifully come to an end. Anger and love had dueled it out, and love had now won. He broke the news. In Genesis chapter 45, verse 3, I'm Joseph. Is my dad really still alive? And I'm imagining that 11 throats just take this huge gulp, 22 eyes widened to the size of saucers, because the brothers, still in probably very deep genuflect, didn't move. I mean, they ventured glances at each other and probably mouthed, Joseph? Their last memory of their younger brother was of some pale-faced, frightened braggart being carried off to Egypt. I mean, they'd counted their coins and they had washed their hands of the kid. He was a teenager then. And he's a prince now? They probably lifted their heads ever so slightly. And Joseph probably lowers his hands. I'm imagining his makeup is probably running down his face. Maybe his chin is even quivering. And maybe his voice even shook when he spoke and said, come closer to me. So maybe they rose to their feet, I'm imagining pretty slowly, pretty cautiously. And he says, I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold to Egypt. And then Joseph told them what? Not to fear. Actually, God sent me before you to save lives. And I'm thinking the brothers are still not quite sure who this man is that's doing the speaking. This man who wept for them, called for them, and is now caring for them. I mean, he promised to provide for them and sealed the promise with even more tears. Because as I gathered from the story, he stands up from his chair, he throws his arms around his baby brother, and it says in Genesis chapter 45, verses 14 and 15, he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. He kissed all his brothers and wept over them, and after that, his brothers talked with him. And so I'm imagining that Joseph talked with Judah, the one who had come up with the slave trafficking idea to begin with. He probably talked to Reuben, who was the firstborn, who didn't always behave like a big brother. And he probably engaged in conversation with Simeon and Levi, who had created so much violence in a city called Shechem, their own dad called them instruments of cruelty. Genesis chapter 49, verse 5. How would you like to have that as a nickname in your family? Your dad calling you, you're just an instrument of cruelty. That'd be pretty shocking, right? But these are the boys, these are the brothers with whom Joseph is now speaking. And those who had tied his hands and had mocked his cries, Now he's kissing all of them. Hostility and anger had melted onto the marble floor, and Joseph didn't talk at them. He didn't talk over them. They just talked. And the next thing you know, Joseph is outfitting his brothers with new clothes and new oxen carts. These boys are outcasts one moment, and they are people of privilege the next. The famine is still raging. The fields are still begging. Circumstances are clearly very hostile. But they are now safe. They would make it through this. Because they were good people? No. Because they were family. The prince was their brother. And I think all of us have experienced a famine in our lives. Not necessarily a food-type famine, but a famine, a desolateness. Maybe it's been the loss of someone that you've loved, or the loss of a job, or the loss of your ability to communicate with others. Whatever the case might be, we've known famine. And like Joseph's brothers, we've found ourselves in dry seasons. Resources are gone, supplies are depleted, energy is expired. Sounds a lot like what we're living through now. We've stood where those brothers stood. We've done what the brothers did. We've, unfortunately, hurt sometimes the people that we love. We've lost our temper. We've misplaced our priorities. And like these shepherds of Beersheba, we've sought help from the prince. Our prince. We've offered our prayers and we've pleaded our case. We've wondered if we would have places for the likes of people like us. And what the brothers found in Joseph's court, we find in Jesus Christ. The prince is our brother. Now, is that a new thought to you? Jesus, your brother? I mean, you've heard Jesus described as Lord, Savior, Messiah, King. But brother? Well, it's biblical. On one occasion, Jesus was speaking to his followers when his biological family tried to get Jesus' attention. His mother and his brothers, they were standing outside, and they sent word that they wanted to speak to Jesus. And Jesus took advantage of that very moment, and he made a very tender gesture and statement. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 12, verses 49 and 50, he, referring to Jesus, stretched out his hand toward his disciples and said, "Here are my mother, here are my brothers, here are my sisters. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my mother, is my sister, is my brother." And I'm thinking that if you and I had been present on that day when Jesus made that statement, I don't think his family, to whom he was referring now, his disciples, I don't think that would have really impressed us much. I mean, none of his followers were of noble birth. There was no deep pockets there. There was no blue blood people coming from the right family line. I mean, we had Peter, who had his swagger. We had John, who had his temper. We had Matthew, who had his very checkered past and certainly very colorful friends. And like Jacob's sons in the Egyptian court, they seemed outclassed. Yet Jesus was not embarrassed to call them his family. He laid claim to those people in public. And church, he lays claim to you and to me today. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 11. Jesus, who makes people holy, and those who are made holy are from the same family. So he is not ashamed to call them his brothers and sisters. Jesus redefined his family to include all who want to come near him. The account of Joseph is simply an appetizer for the Bible's main course, which is the announcement of the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And there are so many similarities, I think, that exist between Joseph and Jesus. Joseph was the favorite of Jacob, remember? That's what got him into trouble to begin with. Well, Jesus was the beloved Son of God, Matthew chapter 3, verse 17. Joseph wore a coat of many colors. Jesus did the deeds of many wonders. Joseph fed the nations. Jesus fed the multitudes. Joseph prepared his people for the coming famine. Jesus came to prepare his people for eternity. Under Joseph's administration, grain increased. In Jesus' hands, water became the finest wine, and a basket of bread became a buffet to thousands of people. Joseph responded to the crisis of nature. Jesus responded to one crisis after another. He told typhoons to settle down and waves to be quiet. He commanded cadavers to stand up and the crippled to dance and the mute to sing. And people hated him for it. Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus was sold for 30. Joseph was falsely accused and thrown into prison. Jesus was condemned for no cause at all and nailed to a cross and murdered. The brothers thought they had seen the last of Joseph when they sold him off to slavery, and the soldiers, after they had sealed the tomb, thought the same thing about Jesus. He will never be seen again. But Joseph resurfaces now as a prince. And so did Jesus. Because while his killers slept and his followers wept, Jesus stood up from the slab of death, never to die again. God gave Jesus what Pharaoh gave Joseph, a promotion to the highest place. It says in Ephesians chapter 1, verses 20 and 22, God raised him, referring to Jesus, from death and set him on a throne in deep heaven, in charge of running the universe, everything from galaxies to governments, no name and no power exempt from his rule. And not just for the time being, but forever. He is in charge of all of it and has the final word on everything. But this is where the similarities, I think, cease. Because Joseph's reign in his life eventually came to an end. But Jesus, heaven will never see an empty throne. Jesus occupies it at this very moment. He creates weather patterns. He redirects calendars. He recycles calamities and pandemics, all with the goal of creating moments like this one, in which we, his very undeserving family, can hear Jesus say, I am Jesus, your brother. He weeps at the very sight of you. Not tears of shame, but tears of joy. He calls for you in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. He wants us to come near him. We sold him out for silver. We who buried the very memory of our deeds. Joseph gave his brothers wagons and robes. Your brother and mine promises to, Paul writing to the church in Philippi, in Philippians chapter 4, verse 19, your big brother Jesus promises to supply all your needs according to his riches. Let's trust him to take care of us. You know, God is doing in our generation what he did in ancient Egypt. He's redeeming a remnant of people. And in his final book, God reiterates his vision. This is Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 and 10. A great multitude, which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. This dream drives the heart of God. His purpose from all eternity has been and remains to prepare a family to live with him in heaven forever. In Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11, the prophet says, quoting God, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. In one verse, what word is mentioned 3 separate times? Plan. Plan, plan, plan. God is planning for our good. In all the setbacks and in all the slip-ups, he is still ordaining the best for our future. Every event of our days is designed to really draw us toward our God and our destiny. And when people junk us into a pit, we can stand up. When family members sell us out, we can get back on our feet. If you've been falsely accused or wrongly imprisoned or utterly abandoned or shut in or masked up and socially distant, we may stumble, but we will not fall. And why? God works out everything in conformity with the purpose of his will. It's what Paul said to the church in Ephesus, Ephesians 1:11. In church, everything means everything. There are no exceptions. Everything in your life is leading to a climactic moment in which Jesus will, according to Paul writing to the Colossians, in Colossians chapter 1, verse 20, Jesus will reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. You know, wonderful things can really happen when your big brother helps you out. Not because you're strong, but because your brother is. Not because you're good, but because your brother is. Not because you're big, but because your brother is. He's the prince, and he has a place prepared for you and me. And the question is, will you join him? So this week, church, lean on Big Brother. Trust in him. He'll guide you through. We're living through unusual and, for many people, extraordinarily tough times. Tough in terms of emotions. You know, we have this huge increase in depression and suicide and drug abuse. I mean, it was already bad before, but now being socially distant and isolated, it's just created this cauldron of problems for people who were already pretty close to losing themselves. It's not easy. People have lost their jobs, and some people have unfortunately lost their minds, and even others have lost people that they love. But regardless of those circumstances, as difficult as it might be, you have a big brother upon whom you can lean, because he will get you through this. He has promised you repeatedly that he will. This week, if you would just trust him. Trust Jesus to get you through. Your big brother loves you, and you can depend on him. So we've picked a song that we're going to sing. It's referred to as an invitation song. Back in the old days, people could come forward and confess sins, or they'd be baptized, or whatever the case might be. And that's still appropriate if that moved you. But maybe the idea of an invitation song is to invite you to become engaged in your own spirituality, to hear God's word and apply it, to use it in your life, to let it grow you, to develop a deeper, more meaningful relationship with our Lord and Savior, with whom we came to spend some time today. So we're going to sing this song. If you have a prayer request, you can pass it up at this time. We'll pray over those, and then we'll be dismissed. Let's stand, please.